Welcome everybody. It's fantastic for us to kick off the energy track for Church of 2020. A great lineup throughout the day and tomorrow. That's going to take us on a bit of a journey on conversations we need to have on energy post-COVID. Common person at the center of that. People to sort of kick us off and really frame are these important questions that government will be asking, the private sector will be should be asking around energy. What are the challenges? And what are the opportunities? Both the gentlemen we have joining us today, Dr. Ajay Mathur and Vikram Mehta. Nearly everybody, but let me just do a quick intro to both of them. We'll start with Dr. Ajay Mathur, who is the Director General of TERI. He started out in TERI in '86. Went on to an illustrious career at the World. He was president. He's been our chief climate negotiator. He was our 2015 Paris Agreement. He's now, of course, back at TERI as the Director General, but importantly, also in an energy efficiency lens, energy efficiency. So really, he's seen the full value chain. We have Mr. brings multiple dimensions as well. Currently, obviously, the chair of Brookings. Again, bringing an incredible private sector lens and research and think tank lens to this. I'm going to moderate this discussion with to frame what are these important. So, I'm going to turn it over.
Thanks, Gaurav. Ajay, it's great to have you in a conversation. The last time we met was in a government office, and we were there to discuss how the government should achieve its objective to provide clean, affordable, and secure energy to everyone in India. Today, the subject that we are going to discuss is the same, but the circumstances and the context are dramatically different. The economy has crashed, millions are out of a job, and oil prices have hit not a historic low, but certainly a two-decade low. The energy sector, in some senses, is now buffeted by two clashing forces. On one hand, it's brought into, the COVID crisis has brought into sharp relief the interdependencies, the planetary interdependencies, the fact that pandemics, global warming do not recognize geography or national boundaries, that they do not lend themselves to isolated solutions, that it really requires a collective effort to resolve these sort of issues. And this, of course, raises the question whether COVID will now accelerate the pace of decarbonization. Will it indeed bring governments, industry, and civic society together to address the issue of global warming, which is an existential crisis? But there is another force that's also, I think, we need to take into account, and that is the force of economics, the force of the market. The fact that the price of oil has collapsed does, to some extent, reduce the competitiveness of clean energy. And so we have to ask the question, will this, again, a post-COVID consequence lead to a stalling of the impetus towards clean energy? I've never been a supporter of this trade-off agreement between economic growth and clean energy. But you have been a major architect of some, in the past, in trying to establish a balance between the two, in trying to establish the roadmap towards a green growth trajectory. So I just wanted to ask you in this conversation, maybe to give me your views, or give us your views on how you see the post-COVID sort of economic recovery impacting the opportunities in our drive towards a clean energy future?
Vikram, it's always wonderful to be with you. And as you remembered, the meeting in the government office on the energy vision for the future is now dramatically different. And I would suggest that there are three changes that are driving this, and I'd like to spend a minute on each one of them. One is that I think the structure of demand for energy has changed. The second I would like to point out is that the long-term move towards renewables is now inevitable and accelerated. And the third is that the relatively small fiscal space that we have, you know, the 20 lakh crore overall package, actually it includes the previous packages, it's a multi-year package. If you look at it, this is about the best that we can do. I mean, $250 billion is already half of our annual national budget. So the amount that we can be able to do would be limited, and therefore there would be requirements for raising more money. But let me come to that. So the first issue is demand. We have seen, obviously, in these days with lower economic activity, a lowering of energy demand. There is the question, will it come back again up like a V? I don't think so. You know, the best analysis that I read on the COVID thought that we will have this first phase of infections, the lockdowns will reopen, and then there would be a large number of people who are infected in a second infection. However, the number of deaths in that infection would be much lower, but a lot of people would be impacted. In other words, the number of productive days would decrease, and if productive days decrease, so does energy demand. The second scenario said that, like the 1918-1919 Spanish flu epidemic, this is something which will come again, go away, come again, go away, but keep on decreasing with time till it disappears. Again, the point remains that as this happens, societies would need to put in place a health.
I can't hear.
Yeah, I think it's. I think we've lost Dr. Mathur. I think he's back.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry. The point is that there are these three scenarios, and these three scenarios are all essentially talk about the fact that this is a long-term problem, which means that productivity declines over a long period of time are with us. That also has an energy implication. If people don't go to work because they are not well, energy is not used. So if we look at the past growth of energy use, every time there's been a decline, and in the past it's largely been because of economic depressions, energy use has picked up again, but from a lower trajectory. And it has gone back to the same level of rate of growth as it was earlier. So you would have a growth, a decline, and then again growth, and then again decline. I think we will see something similar again, but you will see a much lower rate of growth than we have seen in the past. That's the first point, which means that the kind of infrastructure that we have for providing energy is probably good enough. And by the time there is a need for more infrastructure, because India is, after all, an energy deficient country, by the time we have need for new infrastructure, we would see renewables become economically viable. In fact, we are already there. Solar electricity is the cheapest electricity when the sun is shining. And the Solar Energy Corporation of India tenders tell us that it would be the cheapest even on a round-the-clock basis if the tenders, which I think have to work in about a 3-year period, come true, and there's no reason why they won't. The short point that I want to leave you with is that on the demand side, we will probably see a structure which would lead to the addition of green power. I would like to end, Vikram, by focusing on the fiscal space. See what happened in India. The oil prices declined. The government needs taxes because no economic activity is happening. They increased the taxes on petroleum fuels. You and I as consumers will not pay more, but a greater part of our money will go to the national treasury rather than to the countries that are oil exporting countries. Consequently, now this is true for every country of the world. It's not just true for India. Consequently, I do not see a very large decline, a price-related decline in the, or rather price-related increase in the demand for petroleum fuels. This would imply that the kinds of economic impetus that there is for things like electric vehicles, with the electricity being provided by renewables, those kinds of structures are actually strengthened, not weakened. To cut a long story short, I believe that the economics moves us towards a greener future rather than a reinvestment in the kinds of things that we have right now.
Yeah, no, I think, Ajay, I agree with you. But before I think we can get to that objective, there are a number of issues that we will definitely have to resolve, which are causing or creatable costs for us in our economy. And maybe this is the opportunity for us to address it. For example, subsidies. You know, today the oil and gas sector, oil gas will draw $12.5 billion of subsidies. The power sector takes up, and you know that better than I do, $8.5 billion of subsidies. And renewables only actually subsidized to the extent of about $1.7 billion. So we have to first and foremost address the issue of subsidies if we want to actually move towards a green energy system. Second is that the market is actually, pricing is very distorted. And it's not just the power sector pricing, it's across the value chain itself. Whether it's gas prices, whether it's oil prices, those are totally distorted. Once again, we need to introduce those, and this is an opportunity. I think that the fragmentation of decision making in our energy sector, and not just within the energy sector, but between the energy sector and other sectors that are interlinked to energy, needs to be broken down, and we need to create a more holistic institutional mechanism for decision making. I mean, as you know, we have 5 ministries that are involved with energy alone. And over and above that, there's the Ministry of Water, there's the Ministry of Environment, and we simply don't talk to each other. So a green future really needs to, there are many other issues, but certainly I would say that COVID and the near-term COVID future offers government to address the fiscal challenge by redirecting or removing the subsidies. It offers us an opportunity to create a more holistic mechanism for decision making, and it allows us also to address some distortions in the market. One last point, which I would really appreciate your comment on, is I've always felt, Ajay, that the energy sector is not a sector that gets enough publicity or attention by the government communications in its communication strategy. I mean, if the Prime Minister will talk about energy, he talk about a lot of other sectors, but he hasn't actually in any of his speeches addressed the issue of clean energy and the unhealthy linkage between economic growth, energy demand, and environmental degradation. I really believe that the government of India should now legislate a climate change and clean energy bill. And this should actually be one way of trying to bring energy and clean energy in particular to the forefront of the public's attention. Just wondered what you thought about that.
Can I be provocative? Well, I always am provocative with you, so I'm not going to ask you whether I will or I will not. I would suggest that the fragmentation of decision making in energy may actually work out to the benefit of the move towards green energy at this moment. And the reason I'm saying this is because at a macro level, there are adequate number of vested interests who would believe that the recovery packages, the economic stimulus packages that are being put, if they're put in conventional energy, you will get more bang for the buck, you will get more people on the jobs quicker, etc. But as long as they are fragmented, the economic decision making tends to dominate. And economically, it is very clear that whether it is coal or whether it is petroleum products, the fossil fuels, are both on a weak wicket as we move ahead for a variety of reasons. For example, you talked of distorted pricing, but the fact that we have got an ever increasing tax on oil and petroleum has made the gains because of lower international petroleum prices, they've just nullified the gains. If you had a holistic strategy, it is quite possible that as we move towards market pricing, that petroleum would be so cheap that people would be incentivized to use more of it. But anyway, as I said, that's being provocative. And I would love to see how you would react to this. Vikram, the second point that I think is important is that I think you are completely right in the fact that energy does not occupy as central. Though I will suggest that that energy is more center stage than it has been earlier. I mean, I recall that the Prime Minister personally, for example, launched the energy efficiency program. And the success of the energy efficiency program was largely because he gave a message. The government and the private sector leaders worked towards it because it was a very clear message. I think a similar kind of message on clean energy would certainly help us move in the right direction. Climate change and clean energy bill, awfully interesting. I would like us to see what are the hooks on which we can put it at this point of time.
Yeah, I mean, let me just go back to the issue of decision making. I take your point about the price of crude oil and then the price at the retail, but I am looking beyond that actually, Ajay. I'm asking a more basic question, and let's say take the issue of clean cooking. You know, it's a subject that currently falls between the Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Renewable Energy, and in some senses it's not getting the kind of focused attention, and that's why one reason why we are not able to accelerate that. I think, in my view, at least accelerate it to the extent. The issue of water, we know full well that there is a real crisis of water today, and it's getting worse as time goes on. If this is not, in some senses, we're going to find it very difficult to run our power plants. We're going to find it very difficult to clean our solar panels. Right. And the question that I ask is addressing these issues. Who is bringing the issue of water shortage to the attention of the Minister of Power, to the attention of the Minister of Renewable Energy? So I'm not disagreeing with specific sort of issues like the one you've mentioned, but I come to the conclusion that this subject of energy, especially as it's linked to the economic growth in a post-COVID world, where there is no doubt that we will have to collaborate if we wish to address all of the kind of challenges that have manifested as a result of this health crisis. I think that this is an opportunity once again to look at institutions of governance, the institutions of administration, of key economic departments, and specifically in the context of clean energy. My concern actually, Ajay, is that the impetus clean energy might get spurred because governments begin to feel that price of oil is now at a crashing low. Coal prices have also started to fall. And so there is now a short-term gain by refocusing attention on fossil fuels. And the momentum towards renewables will just stall.
Yeah. So, I'm going to take one idea that you said, and I think we need to focus on it, and that is water. One of the major reasons why I understand that we have not been able to move ahead on water and its integration with other areas is the fact that it is a state subject under the Constitution. And the government of India, therefore, has very little to do with it. This might be the right moment to move an amendment bill to say that water would be in the concurrent list or on the federal list. I think the long-term implications of something of that sort are immense, and today's political reality helps us move ahead in that manner. So I completely take your point about clean cooking, about transport, the economic stimulus, the details of which we are still to see. But having, for example, MSMEs focus on two things. One is on electric charging, both in rural areas and in urban areas. You're creating new sectors, you're creating big jobs, which by definition are new jobs. I think would help us lock into a future that is desirable. Similarly, with cooking, can some of these SMEs, particularly in the rural sector, become the distributors, the enablers, the rechargers of cleaner cooking fuels? Whether, I, by the way, still consider LPG a clean cooking fuel. We'll move to electricity, but that's in the future. Nobody's going to wait for cooking their meal simply because the electricity is not flowing in the wires. I think this opportunity presents great moments for helping us make the institutional changes that will help us move in the direction that you and I are talking about.
Just one issue which we haven't touched on, Jay, I really think we need to just bring it to the table at least, and that's transportation. You're in Delhi, I'm in Delhi, and we both we are locked down, or we were locked down, but we could see the sky, we could see the blue sky, and in the evenings we could finally see stars. And our worry is, of course, that this whole situation is going to change. I was told, I read somewhere that at the height of the lockdown, there were no more than 300 trucks sort of arriving into the Delhi NCR area. On the day that the government announced the relaxation of the lockdown, 20,000 trucks entered the NCR. Now, if that trend continues, we will not be able to breathe fresh air for very long. So here again is an issue that we need to actually, maybe you in your capacity as the head of the leading energy institute in the country, sort of throw out to the government suggestions on how they issue transportation. Not just a question of electrical vehicles, because that's definitely there on the cards, but that requires infrastructure and a lot of, but we need to do something so that we don't lose we don't lose out on what we have gained. We've paid a lot for it, but we have gained something on the environmental front. What would you suggest, Ajay?
Vikram, I think you've put your finger on a very important public pulse, the public pulse of seeing the clean skies. Now that we have seen them, we know it is possible. We also understand that this is a matter of economic choices. It was a very expensive economic choice which made these clean things possible. But there are other economic choices, whether it is transport, whether it is the fuels used by industry,
Right.
which will ensure that we have clean air tomorrow. In my view, we need to sustain this public pressure, provide the people and the government with the kinds of options that can sustain this future, and therefore help bring about the political change, the institutional change which is necessary for enabling this.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
No,
we have to do it together. This has to be a mass movement.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I mean, one last thought that I had, and I actually, I'm wrestling with it, so I'm not even clear in my own head. But, you know, the financial metrics that we in business, I'm counting myself as a former business, have used is always been mark to market, okay? And in that process, of course, we have seldom actually brought into the picture the externalities. And the accounting system now, I think, needs to be also redefined so that in some senses it's marked to the environment. It's marked to the externality. So every single, you know, we need to actually find a mechanism by which the externality is costed in to every transaction. And businessmen and governments appreciate the consequence of their acts and the consequence, of course, in terms of carbon footprint. This again, I think, is a subject that needs to be discussed in greater depth. I think this subject should be raised whilst we are struggling to find a pathway towards recovery. Do you agree with that, Ajay?
I completely agree with you on that. I think there is an opportunity right now. We have looked at a number of ways of doing what you're suggesting, internalize the environment, whether it is looking at a modified GDP, whether it is looking at, as you said, the mark to environment. The approach that we believe is possibly effective is something in which cradle to cradle instead of a cradle to grave kind of an approach, so that within decision making you are looking at all the wastes, or what are today the wastes, and seeing how they become inputs to something else. But clearly there's a discussion on this which I think the situation calls for.
I'm not sure if we have time. We have, and then I'd be happy to take any questions, or we would be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, both of you. That was a great discussion, and we do have another panel coming up in 2 minutes, so I'm going to give you a rapid fire round. Firstly, for all the questions that people have asked, look, the ones on renewable energy and also on green transport, the next panel is going to be excellent on, really focused on renewable energy. We have a panel tomorrow that's going to look at green transport, so I recommend we answer those questions there. But very quickly, is there a role for nuclear? That's sort of, it's not talked about much anymore. Is there a nuclear component post-COVID for the energy mix of India?
Vikram,
yes.
No, Vikram, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say yes. I don't have much nuclear other than the fact that I know we have a fairly substantive amount of reserves of thorium, and I'm told from all that from people who know a bit more that there are many reactors that have very high standards of safety. So I would say that option should be very much on the agenda.
This is ultimately an economic question. Today's nuclear, if you build a new nuclear plant today, the electricity cost will be higher than that of coal cost, which is already higher than that of solar. So the question is, who will buy it? Nevertheless, if the modular reactors are able to provide electricity, for example, during summers, when we have a much larger electricity demand than in winters, that would be a useful place for them, but then we'll have to see whether they're economically viable for operating 3 months or 4 months in a year. Similarly, if the newer reactors can ramp up and ramp down fast, they would form an extremely useful complementary technology to solar technology. So it is these kinds of economics and technical performance matters which will determine the future of nuclear energy.
Superb. Thank you, Dr. Mathur and Vikram, because unfortunately we have run out of time. I had 1 or 2 other questions, but I'll send them to you separately.